To launch us into our forward-thinking agenda, I'm honoured to introduce Ms. Jacqueline Fuller, the President of Google.org and a Vice President at Google, where she has worked since 2007. At Google.org, she leads a philanthropic team that invests more than $200 million per year to support non-profit innovations that leverage technology to help solve some of humanity's great challenges, including the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to joining Google, Ms. Fuller was the Deputy Director of Global Health at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Ms. Fuller, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Jane. I want to thank the Asia Foundation for hosting this summit on women's leadership in STEM and for inviting me to speak. I also want to thank the governments of the US, Japan, and Korea for spotlighting this issue. I'm Jacqueline Fuller, and I'm president of Google.org, which is Google's philanthropy. And we support nonprofits, researchers, governments, and social innovators across the globe by providing grants from Google, as well as technical expertise, our volunteers. And we're providing more than $300 million this year to support the closing of equity gaps, especially for women and girls. Now, this is a really timely conversation because the COVID crisis is accelerating the inequities that we've had going for many years. So, for example, in the COVID crisis, women's jobs are 1.8 times more vulnerable than men's jobs. We also see that although women make up 39% of global employment, they make up 54% of overall job losses. And just recently, we saw here in the US that women are leaving the workforce at 4 times the rate as men. And that's because women are shouldering the burden of online schooling, they're parenting, they're caring for elders, while also trying to hold down work and a job during this pandemic. We know that improving women's employment shouldn't be just an addendum to global development, but really its central objective. And as we look at the future of work, we know that workers across all sectors, in all careers, are going to need digital skills. And we're going to all need to be lifelong learners. And so that's why we're participating with partners, grantees globally to help women and girls and other underrepresented groups, including people from low-income communities, people of color, to ensure that they have the digital skills that they need to be connected to good, high-paying jobs in growing careers. So through our Grow with Google program, Google is going to train 70 million people globally, and we're targeting half of them to be women, and we're on track with that goal. You know, just one example of a partnership we're doing through this effort is actually with the Asia Foundation, and we provided a grant to help them launch their Go Digital ASEAN program. And they're reaching more than 200,000 micro entrepreneurs across 10 countries, gaining digital literacy and skills. And about 40% are women. Another example is, and part of this digital skilling is we need to make sure that our kids, our students understand how to be safe online. And so in Korea, for example, I visited recently with one of our partners called the Center for Digital Literacy. And this center is helping 17,000 junior high students to learn how to better evaluate online media sources. Now, in addition to digital skills for everyone, we also need to think really carefully and deeply about how we can increase the number of women who have careers, not just in STEM across the board, which is important, but in computer science. And I can speak from my vantage as a woman in technology in the tech industry to say that this is essential for us to have more women who are programmers, product managers, working in data analysis, for example, working in artificial intelligence. Why? Well, we know that these are strong and important and valuable careers for the individuals themselves, for the women themselves. But we also know it's important for us as a society, because programmers and product managers and engineers are the ones who are designing our products and our new features, and they're the ones who are really building the scaffolding for the future as we determine how technology is going to interact with us in our day-to-day lives. And all of us as human beings, we tend to think about and work on the problems that we experience personally. And so we need more women who are coming and leading teams and who are helping to create the agenda for what we are using technology to solve. But the problem is there's a huge gap there. In fact, UNESCO data shows that only about a third of STEM students in higher education globally are women. And in ICT, it's only about 3% women across the board. So at Google.org, this is something that we've been working on for about 10 years. We're investing $80 million specifically in closing that gap in computer science education for women and girls. So when we looked at this issue to understand, what do we need to do better? How can we close this gap? We see two fundamental issues. One is early access, and the other is encouragement. So let's look at the early access. So we know that early exposure really matters. That's what the data shows. We need to provide computer science experiences to students in middle school. So for example, if girls from the ages of about 10 to 13 have an experience with computer science, they're 18% more likely to show interest when they are offered computing classes in high school and in college. We know, for example, that 3 out of 4 women today who are working in technology were exposed to computer science while they were in junior high school. And it's not just exposure, it's the kind of exposure as well. We need to make sure that we show that coding is fun and it's interactive, it's creative. We also need to make sure that the way that we're presenting computer science, it shows young girls that computer science is really just a tool. Learning computational thinking, learning programming, learning these languages is really about providing ways for them to pursue their passion in art, in science, in architecture, health, whatever career. And we know that having even just making these minor improvements makes a huge difference. So for example, we also know that encouragement is really important. And something that's interesting when you look at the research is that it actually has an impact on girls, but not boys. So girls who are encouraged by an adult, whether that's a teacher, a cousin, a neighbor, someone who interacts with them and just encourages them, hey, you might want to consider a career in technology, a career in computer science, can have a huge impact. So maybe that could be a call to action for all of us, everyone who's listening today. Why don't you think in your mind, is there a young woman in your life, in your orbit, who's good at problem solving, who's interested in helping to create technological solutions? Encourage her to pursue computer science. So as we think about how we can do this at scale, one of the things that we've seen is that governments are absolutely leading in this area. Many governments have stepped forward and said that we want to include computer science, for example, in the curriculum in all of our skills. But we know in order to do this at scale, we really need to support teachers. So for example, in Japan, the government has pledged to bring CS education to all levels of schools by 2022, something we really support. And there are organizations like one that we have partnered with, Mina No Code, or Code for Everyone, for the past couple years. Now, working together, they've trained more than 80,000 teachers across Japan in computer science, and they have a goal of reaching 1 million middle school students by 2025. So in order to do this, we need to make sure that those classrooms and the way that we're teaching is inclusive so that students see people like themselves who have tech careers and who are part of that training as well. So as we think about how this then continues, this kind of inclusive teaching can continue in computer science beyond middle school, I know from just a personal anecdote that it's important in colleges as well. My daughter pursued a computer science degree, and she entered, so excited about the idea about becoming a software engineer. But at the college level, she found that the problem sets that they were given in class had to do with things like how to win at poker, or how to win at Wall Street, or how to beat your opponent in a strategy game. But the University, for example, of Berkeley or Carnegie Mellon, just by changing the problem sets that students were working on to take on questions such as, how could you use computer science in order to solve infant mortality in a place like Kenya? That helped increase and keep interested some of the girls, the young women, the students who had signed up for those courses. So it's not just getting more women interested in computer science. We need to make sure that computer science is presented in a way that doesn't inadvertently, disproportionately weed out women and girls. So we know also that there are things that all of us need to do better. Once we have women who are pursuing STEM degrees, who have finished that college CS degree. So for example, the tech industry, companies like Google need to make sure that we have fair hiring practices, and so that we are hiring diverse talent, including women, and that we're doing a better job of creating inclusive environments once they're on board in places like Google. We need to make sure that we're looking at promotion rates. We need to make sure we're looking at pay equity. So this is something that the tech industry needs to do. We know our government partners, for example, need to continue the investments that they're making in educational opportunities and make sure that those are being offered to everyone, to young girls, as well as people from low-income backgrounds, communities of color. And parents and teachers, we also need to make sure that we're encouraging equally all of our potential students in order to become leaders in technology. So I want to thank you again for inviting me today and for the work that everyone here is doing to increase the pathways for women into STEM careers and especially into computer science. Thank you. And now I'm delighted to take a few questions from the global audience. So let me start. First question. What measures do you think the private sector can take to elevate women's visibility in STEM fields as role models and in recognition of their important contributions? So this is really key. We know that representation matters. In fact, our research shows that only about half as many girls are interested in pursuing computer science as boys. And you want to ask, well, what is behind that? What is driving that? We also know that the research shows that of the kids who are interested in pursuing computer science, girls are actually markedly less confident that they're going to be successful than boys. So we think one of the issues there is, what are we showing to children, to students? What is the image we're providing of what someone who's in a STEM field looks like, or what a computer scientist looks like? So we worked with the Gina Davis Institute, and they're doing really good research. And they've looked at the media that we show, television, film, to children, and what they found was really interesting. Only about 1 in 3 characters shown is female. And in STEM careers, it's worse. About 1 in 6 in characters in a STEM career is female, and only about 1 in 13 in computer science. So you can see how that lack of representation can have an impact on perception. Now, we also need to look at that in other areas as well. And Lorraine Toohill, who leads marketing across Google, for example, took the initiative to take that tool and applied it to our own marketing and creative. And we saw there, when we did that, that we had some work to do to make sure that what we're portraying in our creative is inclusive. We also need to ensure that when we do have women in leadership roles, that we're giving them platforms, that we're giving them the ability to be seen by broad audiences. A recent example that comes to mind is my friend Marian Gork here at Google, who is a VP of engineering and a Black woman, spoke recently at the Grace Hopper Convention. So this is a gathering, it was virtual this year, of women and girls and students who are interested in computer science careers. So having her deliver that keynote helped ensure that people see and can experience and see for themselves someone who looks like themselves being in a position of leadership in computer science. Okay, next question. What do you think is needed to increase the diversity of the talent pool at big tech companies? Well, speaking here from the vantage point of Google, we see that steadily growing our workforce to ensure that it reflects the world around us is a top goal for us. And what we need to begin with is good data. We need to make sure that we have good data, and then we want to make sure that we're held accountable, that we're transparent about that data. So Google was actually one of the first tech companies to share our diversity report. We did that back in 2014. And when we did that, and when we looked at our data, what we saw is we had some room for improvement. So we have done a lot of work around not only recruiting, but also retention. And we've been able to grow tech women from about 16% in 2014 to 23%. So that's a strong increase, but we still have work to do there. We also need to make sure that people feel included. So we need to look at things like promotions and pay scales and growth opportunities to make sure that we're doing a good job there as well. And we need to think about, are there tools that we can develop, products that we can do. So for example, we have a tool that we developed for job postings and to make sure that they're not gendered and to take out the bias. And when we ran our job postings through that tool, we saw that increased applications from women by 11%. How can we ensure that our philanthropic support during the pandemic also advances the shared goal of achieving gender equal societies? Super important, because as we talked about earlier, we're seeing a lot of the economic impact of COVID disproportionately hit women and girls. So I think one of the things we can do as philanthropy is to look at who's controlling the funding and make sure that we have enough women who are out there leading big philanthropic efforts. So we've seen some great examples there. For example, Mackenzie Scott came forward this year. She has signed the Giving Pledge, and she provided $1.7 billion recently to more than 100 organizations working in areas like racial justice or LGBT rights. Melinda Gates, who I worked with at the Gates Foundation, is doing a phenomenal job. And around COVID in particular, she's making sure that any vaccine that we have available is made available to everyone, including the Global South. We also need to make sure we're applying a gender lens across all of our giving, and that's something that we're doing at google.org. So for example, when we look at some of our COVID funding, we're ensuring that we have nonprofits as partners who have experience in reaching all sectors across society, including women and girls. One example is a partner named Inco, who we're working with in Asia and in Europe, and they've done a phenomenal job of getting resources to help increase online learning, for example, where we know that girls are less likely to have access, even in a COVID situation, with online learning. So how does a commitment to STEM equity and supporting more women in STEM contribute to addressing issues such as online violence? Well, we know that gender equality exists online just like it does in the physical world. And so as technologists, we need to make sure that we're creating more inclusive technology. Just one small example that comes to mind is that women and girls are less likely, for example, to want to include a photo of themselves when they're engaging with social apps. And this is as a safety measure in large part, because they're afraid of damage to their reputation or that there might even be physical harm. So we need to have technologists who take into account these usage preferences and these subtle, sometimes nuances around how people engage with technology. And we need to make sure that we're building products and features that take account of these differential experiences that people have online, and to make sure we're providing a safe online experience. I think that's my last question. So I just want to thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. This is such an important topic, and it was an honor to be here as part of it with all of you. Thank you.